Did you know that if you migrated your AVD Session Hosts to Azure V6 VMs, your page file comes silently broken, and you got no idea until all your users start getting kicked out of their sessions? If not, stick around because today I'm going to show you exactly what changed and how to fix it. The best thing, it's a free PowerShell script that you can deploy right now. I'm also going to perform some side-by-side testing just to actually show you what happens when you have a page file on a managed disk instead of a local disk. So, first of all, let's think about what's actually changed with Azure V6 VMs. Up until now, on V5 SKUs and earlier, Azure would automatically initialize and format the temp disk for you. Your page file lived on that temp disk and everything just worked. But on V6 VMs, Microsoft switched to NVMe local storage, and the difference is those NVMe disks come completely raw and unformatted. So, Windows boots up, it looks for the temp disk, finds nothing it recognizes, and then your page file either doesn't get created or it falls back to the OS disk, which is absolutely not where you want it to be in a multi-session AVD environment under load. The result? Session hosts that look healthy on paper, but are actually crashing under load and users reporting bad experience. I've seen reports of out of memory errors, failed logins, really sluggish browsers, the works, all trace back to this one thing. So, in today's video, what we're going to do, we're going to walk through a PowerShell script that handles all of this automatically using NVMe disk detection, formatting, page file placement, and even a reboot loop guard so it doesn't get hammer your host every restart. All right, let's get to it. All right, so historically, it's been best practice to basically put your page file on the local disk. The reason being is because the local disk is a very fast disk, right? Whereas a managed disk is essentially on shared storage. You get about a maximum of 500 IOPS if it's standard, then up to 2,500 versatile IOPS if it's premium. But it's still going to be slower than local disk. Now, the page file is quite important to the operating system. So the faster the page file is, the better the operating system is going to respond, right? So historically within Azure, you had two types of VMs. The first VMs, you wouldn't have a local disk with them, right? So with the local disk, that page file basically sits on the managed disk, right? That's perfectly fine as long as you don't start depending on the page file. So in normal systems, if you're not using like up to 80-90% of the memory, you're not really going to use a page file that much, so the difference won't really be noticeable. But what is normally noticeable is if you are really pushing your session host hard, it's best practice to basically have an Azure VM size which has a local disk in it and then put the page file on that disk. And that basically means is that if the host starts to run out of physical memory, then it starts to use the paging file. And then it really makes a big difference to the usability of that session host. If the page file is on a local disk, it will be a lot more performant, it'll be a lot more responsive, and your users will notice it a lot more. So how can you tell? So basically, if you go into the Azure portal, so I picked an example here of the D8 ADS-V7. So if we go here, it says local storage. So if I look at a D2 ADS-V7 VM, for example, I can see that's going to have a temp disk in it, right? So it takes temp disk, 110 gig, and with that, you get like 37,500 IOPS or 15,000 right IOPS. So you get a lot more IOPS than you would do with a managed disk. But then if you compare that, for example, the DSV7, if I go into this host here and I look at the local storage, you don't get any local storage with those VMs. So this only applies to VMs with local storage. Now, what is the actual problem? So the actual problem is, so if I go onto VM here, which is a V6 VM, and if I just launch my local disk management, so first of all, actually, let's check the page file location. So the page file location for this VM is actually on the C drive, right? So that's the managed disk, not the local disk. So this is a VM SKU which has a local disk. But the problem is this. If I now go onto my local disk management, go to click that, go to there, go to disk management, see there? That disk isn't initialized, right? So that means the operating system can't use it. Okay, so that is my local disk, right? But I'm unable to use it. So essentially what we're going to do here, we're going to show you a script which you can execute on the VMs, and that basically script will run at startup, and that script will basically online this disk. It will then configure the OS to use that as a page file location, right? So let me go and show you how to do that now. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. This is the Virtual Mac YouTube channel. On this channel, we review the latest news around Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365, Nerdio, Enter ID, Intune, basically anything to do with end user compute in Azure. So if that's the type of stuff that you like, please click the like, subscribe button because it really helps to grow the channel. Also, I set up a school community as well, so you can find the link to that in the description. So if you want to get a bit more interactive, I'd love to see you over there. Before we get into the script, a huge shout out to Julian Moran for creating this script, right? Julian and also Stefan Beckman and Nerdio NVP have both been working on this. So Julian created the original script, and then Stefan's just created some stuff that integrated with Nerdio, which I'll show you shortly. But essentially, if we just head over to Julian's Citrus Guide blog page, you'll see here, and this is the blog post originally where I got this information from, and I've actually had a few customers who have actually pointed this to. He goes through all the information here about how the script's working, when to do it, and all that stuff as well. So just have a look at that. Then this is basically what it does. So it detects a disk, it initializes a disk, and then it configures the page file for the disk as well. Okay, so as I mentioned, I've actually implemented this via Nerdio, but all you basically need to do is you need to create a scheduled task on the actual VM. You can use Azure DevOps or Packer or whatever automation piece you use, but I personally use Nerdio for this. Basically need to create a script which creates a scheduled task and then basically just points it to the script as well. And then if you just click on here, it takes us to Julian's GitHub page where you can actually see a full copy of the script there as well. Okay, that's what we've implemented today. Now, what is this actually going to show you? So if I just log on to the output, so this is a host that I've already done it for, right? And you'll see the difference between what we just saw in a second. Okay, so you see the difference now. So first of all, we can see the page file location is now sitting at D page file sys rather than C. So if we just have a look here, if I just fire up the local disk management, that instead of having that local disk is just popping up and saying it is uninitialized, we've got disk 1, it's a D10 disk, and that's showing as online available. So that's where we want to get to. Okay, what I'll do now is I'll show you how to implement it. And then what we're going to do, we're going to run some tests. So I actually wrote a PowerShell script, which will actually go through and it will do some testing. So it's going to launch a load of URLs. And then so it forces the use of the page file. And then it also tracks the performance and the latency. So we'll go through that, perform that test shortly as well. All right. So how to actually implement this solution. So as I mentioned, I use Nerdio to do this. So I use a Nerdio shell app. So Stefan Beckman's done a really good job of creating the configuration for that, which I'll go through in a second. And that's based on Julian's original script. So if we head over to the Nerdio console, what you'll see is I've got this shell app, right? And I've called it configure page file. So in here, we've got the detection scripts in there, and then the meat of it, which is the install script, right? So this is basically going to go in there. I upload the scripts when I create the shell app, and then it basically copies this PowerShell script into the location it needs to execute it. And then from that, it creates a scheduled task, and which I'll show you on the actual VM itself. So this is the meat of it. And then I've got an uninstall script in there as well. So just got that from Stefan's job. So basically, once I've done that, I just basically pushed that out onto the session host. So I created a deployment policy. So if we just go into page file config and I push that out to one of my host pools that I'm using for the testing, and you can see there that I pushed that script onto there as well. So if we actually jump onto that VM, so this is the session host that I pushed that out onto. So if you go to schedule task scheduler, you'll see what we've got here is we've got the scheduled task we execute upon startup, right? So if you go to here, go to triggers, you'll see at system startup. And then that's basically executing this PowerShell script. So you can see there the set page file.ps1 file, right? So that's where the PowerShell script is going into. And then every day when that VM starts up, it just checks that the temp disk is online. If not, it will bring it online and then it will configure the page file just before the users get onto the machine. Okay, so it does actually log the output. So let's go and take a look at that now and see what the log file is telling us. And then you'll see what's happening behind the scenes as well. Right, so this script actually outputs to C, Windows, logs, AVD page file setup. Obviously, you can change that location if you want to, but let's have a look at this script here and you'll be able to see what it's doing. Okay, so this is when it did the initial deployment. You can see here it's basically detecting that it doesn't have a page file. It's then configuring it so it initializes a disk. You can also see it stopped the RD agent as well. So that's to stop people from connecting to the session host while it does its configuration. Obviously, it's a very short space of time when it did that, so that's probably what 30 seconds or so while it did this. So it detected like the CD was on the D drive, so it removed the D drive, and then it basically initialized the temp disk and formatted it as a D drive. Okay, I'll apply some security permissions to that to stop people from messing with that. And then basically just configured that temp disk location to be the page file. So you can see here, current page file, DJI detected, page file is configured, and there you go. So that script will run on every reboot just to make sure that it's consistent as well. That's what's actually under the hood. It's quite simple, right? Pretty easy to do. And so it just make sure that you'll get a lot better performing session hosts, which leads us quite nicely into the next one. So what I've actually done, I actually created a script. I didn't create it, AI created it, which is basically going to run continual web browsers until it forces it to use a page file, and then it detects the latency of that, and then tells us what the user experience is like from that as well. So I've compared that to 3 comparisons. Number 1, which I'll do last, is the VM without a local disk. Number 2, a VM with a local disk but without the page file on the local disk, is on the C drive. And then number 3, we did the test with a page file on the local disk on this VM as well. So we'll run that now, and I'll show you what the results are. All right, so this is the script which I've been using. So as I mentioned, it's gonna launch a load of sessions, browser sessions, and then it'll actually track what the page file is being used for and also what the experience is. All right, so let's kick this off. So just gonna execute the script now. Go. Okay, cool. So you see, it's basically just going to go through, it's going to continually launch more and more sessions. So that's going to run for a few minutes. So we'll come back when it's finished and show you what that results look like. So I just drop down here, you can basically see, and that's going to go, and it actually shows me if the page files have been used or not, and how much of that page file is actually using. All right, we'll be back shortly with the results. All right, let's now run this on a VM without a page file and see what happens. Okay, so this VM, it has the page file, as you can see, that's running on the C pagefile.sys. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just execute the same script and then see what kind of results that we get for this one. All right, let's go. Okay, so you can see that's now there. Go ahead, and it'll launch about 30 browser sessions until it runs out of memory, and then it'll start paging, and then we'll see what those results look like. Finishes. All right, back shortly. All right, so here's results for the VM running with the page file on the local disk. So as we can see here, we've got a rating of good. So these are the numbers which matter, right? So we've got open tabs 30, edge processes 44, handle count 19,555, page volts a second 483, and the iteration time is 16 milliseconds. So we've got a rating of good. Okay, so that means that essentially the user experience was still good, even though the page file was being used. You can see here it's basically saying RAM above 80%, the system pressure is high, and then this script will actually tell me how much the page file has actually been used. We can see it's actually using 213 megabytes of the page file. So that's stuff that should have been in memory, but it's actually on the disk itself, right? Because essentially we run out of memory. So that's what that's saying there. RAM use 90% because we need to hold some back for the actual operating system itself. Okay, so we can see we've got good numbers there. So it's saying response is good, right? We'll now go and check and see what the other session host is like, because that's one's essentially without the page file configured, and see what that's telling us. Okay, so this is the one that doesn't have the page file on the local disk. The page file is actually running on the managed disk. Okay, so the difference here, so a couple of things to mention. First of all, rating degraded. Right, on the other test, rating was good. So this is saying this is the worst experience. But the thing to look at is the page faults a second, 552, right? And on the one that we got a good experience on, the page faults a second, 483, 1003, and then it's page faults a second, 296. Whereas we have a look at this one, let's look. So page faults a second, 1926. Page faults a second, 129. We'll go back a bit. Page faults a second, 552. Page faults a second, 2837. So that number's a lot higher, right, than it was on the configured. And that's the reason why the users will get laggy experience, and that's the reason why the performance is showing as degraded, right? Because it's struggling to keep up, essentially. From a user experience point of view, what that would mean, it would basically mean that the user is actually getting lagginess on the actual VM itself. If I'm clicking on stuff, it's taking 2 or 3 seconds to respond from that, whereas on the other host, the enumeration was a lot lower, so you have a lot more responsive OS. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run the test again But this time we're going to run it on a VM which doesn't have a local disk at all, and just see what the experience is like there as well. All right, back in a sec. All right, so this is the VM without a local disk on it at all. So what we can see here, we've got a page file location, so in C pagefile.sys, so that's running on the managed disk, which is running on a premium SSD. Cool. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to re-kick off that script, and then we'll come back shortly, and then we'll see what the results are telling us that. I expect the results for this will be the same as the other VM, which was using the managed disk, because we weren't using local disk at all, so I expect this to be the same, but let's see. All right, so the results are in. So this is the VM without the local disk on it. So the page file is running on the managed disk. You can see there, it's basically saying rating equals degraded. You can see there, page faults a second, 1,734. And also we're using 93% of the memory. We're also using 193 megabytes of the page file, similar to what we saw in the other one as well. There you go. So basically a summary of what the numbers were telling me is that the VM configured with a local disk and the page file using the local disk, rating equals good, and a low number of page faults a second, which means it wasn't waiting to page as often. The VM with the local disk but without the page file configured on the local disk, so it's using the system disk, got a degraded performance, right? And we saw a higher number of page faults a second. And then what we then saw is this VM without local disk at all, which is just the normal D5S VM, that had the same experience as a VM without the local disk was. So I guess for me, if I were to put a summary against this, is if you really care about user experience, if you have a session host where you regularly hit 80-90% memory, then it's probably worth looking at the VMs with the local disks, right? Because you'll get a much better performance with those as well. So let's also just take a quick look and see how much extra that's going to be, right? Because there is a cost associated to this. We'll have a look and do some quick comparisons. If I wanted to have a local disk, how much extra is it going to cost me every month per session host? So let's go and take a look at that now. So I'm going to look at two separate SKUs. I'm going to look at one with a local disk and one without one. So these are on the V6 VM SKU. So the first one I'm going to look at is the one with a local disk, right? So if we just flick over my screen here, so you can see here we've got a D8 ADS V6 that has a local disk on it, right? And that's the one that I was using for my testing. And you can see here the cost of that VM is £148 and 65p. Okay, so that's based on 240 hours usage. Okay, so that's the cost of that actual VM itself. So we can see there it's 0.676 an hour. So if I wanted to choose one without a local disk, that's going to cost me £138. So that's on a D8S. Okay, so essentially a very similar SKU, but the only difference is one has a local disk, one doesn't have a local disk, and that's 220 hours a month usage. So the difference there is £10 a month, right? Essentially between a local disk and without a local disk. Now, probably not that much, right? So if you've got, I don't know, 10 VMs running in your environment, that's going to be £100 a month. If you've got 100 VMs running in your environment, that's going to be like £1,000 a month difference. We have a local disk. I guess the trade-off that you need to think about from a user experience point of view is how much does that matter? Because to say you would get a better user experience if you are using the temp disk to have your page file on there as well. So I guess that's my summary for this video. Is look, if you can afford it, if you're not that much budget constraint, then I'd definitely pick a VM with a local disk and then use this script to basically put the page file on there, because as we saw from the testing, it does make a difference. Now, that was with one user. So you can imagine if you've got like multiple users logged onto the session host, how much difference that would make from a performance perspective. All right, that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please click that subscribe button because it really helps me grow the channel. And yeah, drop a comment below. Are you using local temp disks on your session host? Be interested to know. All right, cheers. Take care. Bye.